Hi there, everybody. How are you doing? Good to see you, Justin. Thank you for the host. I hope you're doing well. Let me know if the music is still too loud or anything like that. It's been a minute. Oh, hey, Paige. Disneyland Shanghai is not 10 minutes from our hotel. Google lied, but I still think it's doable. Ooh. If you go, I'm going to grill you for everything. Hi, Reddy. Thank you for the host. Hope you're doing well. Thank you all for being here. I haven't done any reading since my last 12 hour, which was back in the middle of April. So the chat is quiet here, but that's okay. I know it's the middle of the week and people are just kind of trickling in, and it's dinner time, so I don't really blame anybody for not being here. I understand life gets busy, especially because it's time for finals and all of that jazz. But yeah, it's good to see you all. I'm not really gonna thank you. I literally just watched it, and this is what it does when I do nothing to it. So it's a little liony maney, like I'm looking a little like Riddy today, but I don't know, she pulls it off better. It is the beginning of the week, isn't it? I don't know what day it is. I thought it was Thursday for a second. You can be in a yelling mood. Oh, I get it, because the chat's quiet. Yeah, for some reason I just thought it was Thursday. No, really, no. Huh. What is that for? Yeah, I'm not gonna beat around the bush too much. I'm just gonna jump right in to the book. So, the last time we read the first 4 chapters. And I'm going to try to read 5 more tonight. So read chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. We'll just jump right in and see how it goes. So, as always, I'll catch up with you guys in between chapters, but we'll just go right in. Chapter 5. When you have many questions on your mind and you suddenly have an opportunity to ask them, the questions tend to crowd together and trip over one another, much like passengers on a crowded train when it reaches a popular station. With Bruce and the Snow Scouts asleep, the 2 elder Baudelaires finally had an opportunity to talk with the mysterious scout in the sweater, but everything they wanted to ask seemed hopelessly entangled. How, Violet started, but the question, how did you know we were the Baudelaires, stumbled against the question, who are you, and fell back against the questions, are you a member of VFD, and what does VFD stand for? Klaus said, but the question, do you know where our sister is, tripped over the question, do you know if one of our parents is alive? Which was already struggling with, how can we get to the headquarters, and will my sisters and I ever find a safe place to live without constantly being threatened by Count Olaf and his troop as they hatch plan after plan to steal the Baudelaire fortune? Although the middle Baudelaire knew that his last question was unlikely to be answered at all. I'm sure you have lots of questions, the boy whispered, but we can't talk here. Bruce is a light sleeper, and he's caused VFD enough trouble already without learning another of our secrets. I promise all your questions will be answered, but first we've got to get to the headquarters. Come with me. Without another word, the sweatered scout turned around, and the Baudelaires saw he was wearing a backpack inscribed with an insignia they had seen at Caligari Carnival. At first glance, this insignia merely appeared to be an eye, but the children had discovered that if you looked closely, you could see the initials VFD cleverly hidden in the drawing. The scout began to walk, and the 2 siblings got out of their blankets as quietly as they could and followed him. To their surprise, he did not lead them toward the cave entrance, but to the back of the cave, where the Snow Scout's fire had been. Now it was nothing more than a pile of gray ashes, although it was still very warm, and the smell of smoke was still in the air. The sweatered scout reached into his pocket and brought out a flashlight. I had to wait for the fire to die down before I showed you, he said, and with a nervous glance at the sleeping scouts, turned the flashlight on and shone it above them. Look. Violet and Klaus looked and saw that there was a hole in the ceiling big enough for a person to crawl through. The last wisps of smoke from the fire were floating up into the hole. A chimney, Klaus murmured. I was wondering why the fire didn't fill the cave with smoke. The official name is vertical flame diversion, the scout whispered. It serves as a chimney and as a secret passageway. It runs from this cave up to the Valley of 4 Drafts. If we climb up there, we can reach headquarters within hours instead of hiking all the way up the mountain. Years ago, there was a metal pole that ran down the center of this hole so people could slide down and hide in this cave in case of an emergency. The pole is gone now, but there should be carved toe holds in the side to climb all the way up. He shone the flashlight on the cave wall, and sure enough, the Baudelaires could see 2 rows of small carved holes, perfect for sticking one's feet and hands into. How do you know all this? Violet asked. The scout looked at her for a moment, and it seemed to the Baudelaires that he was smiling behind his mask. I read it, he said, in a book called Remarkable Phenomena of the Mortmain Mountains. That sounds familiar, Klaus said. Well, it should, the scout replied. I borrowed it from Dr. Montgomery's library. Dr. Montgomery was one of the Baudelaires' first guardians, and at the mention of his name, Violet and Klaus found they had several more questions they wanted to ask. When, Violet started. Why, Klaus started. Another voice startled the Baudelaires and the scout. The voice of Bruce, waking up halfway at the sound of the conversation. All 3 children froze for a moment as Bruce turned over on his blanket and with a long sigh went back to sleep. We'll talk when we reach the headquarters, the scout whispered. The vertical flame diversion is very echoey, so we'll have to be absolutely silent as we climb, or the echoing noise will alert Bruce and the Snow Scouts. It'll be very dark inside, so you'll have to feel against the wall for the footholds, and the air will be smoky, but if you keep your masks on, they'll filter the air and make it easier to breathe. I'll go first and lead the way. Are you ready?" Violet and Klaus turned toward one another. Even though they could not see each other's faces through the masks, both siblings knew that they were not at all ready. Following a complete stranger into a secret passageway through the center of the mountains, toward a headquarters they could not even be sure existed, did not seem like a very safe thing to do. The last time they had agreed to take a risky journey, their baby sister had been snatched away from them. What would happen this time, when they were all alone with a mysterious masked figure in a dark and smoky hole? "I know it must be hard to trust me, Baudelaire," said the sweatered scout, "after so many people have done you wrong." "Can you give us a reason to trust you?" Violet said. The scout looked down for a moment, and then turned his mask to face both Baudelaire's. "One of you mentioned the word xenial," he said, "when you were talking with Bruce about that silly pledge. Xenial is a word which refers to the giving of gifts to a stranger." "He's right," Klaus murmured to his sister. I know that having a good vocabulary doesn't guarantee I'm a good person," the boy said, "but it does mean I've read a great deal, and in my experience, well-read people are less likely to be evil." Violet and Klaus looked at one another through their masks. Neither of them were entirely convinced by what the masked scout had said. There are, of course, plenty of evil people who have read a great many books, and plenty of very kind people who seem to have found some other method of spending their time. But the Baudelaires knew that there was a kind of truth to the boy's statement, and they had to admit that they preferred to take their chances with a stranger who knew what the word xenial meant, rather than exiting the cave and trying to find the headquarters all by themselves. So the siblings turned back to the scout, knotted their masks, and followed him to the footholds in the wall, making sure they still had all the items from the caravan with them. The footholds were surprisingly easy to use, and in a short time the Baudelaires were following the mysterious scout into the dark and smoky entrance of the passageway. The vertical flame diversion that connected the Mortmain Mountain headquarters to this particular volunteer feline detective's cave was once one of the most heavily guarded secrets in the world. Anyone who wanted to use it had to correctly answer a series of questions concerning the force of gravity, the habits of carnivorous beasts, and the central themes of Russian novels, so very few people even knew the passageway's exact whereabouts. Until the two Baudelaire's journey, the passageway had not been used for many years, ever since one of my comrades removed the pole in order to use it in the construction of a submarine. So it would be accurate to say that the vertical flame diversion was a road less traveled, even less traveled than the path through the Mortmain Mountains on which this book began. While the elder Baudelaires had a very good reason to be on the road less traveled, as they were in a great hurry to reach the headquarters and rescue their sister from the clutches of Count Olaf, there is no reason whatsoever why you should be on the road less traveled and choose to read the rest of this woeful chapter, which describes their dark and smoky journey. The ashen air from the Snow Scout's fire was difficult to breathe, even through the masks, and Violet and Klaus had to struggle not to cough, knowing that the coughing sound would echo down the passageway and wake up Bruce. But there is no reason for you to struggle through my dismal description of this problem. A number of spiders had noticed the footholds were not being used lately and had moved in and converted them into spider condominiums, but you are under no obligation to read what happens when spiders are suddenly woken up by the sudden appearance of a climbing foot in their new homes. And as the Baudelaires followed the scout farther and farther up, the strong freezing winds from the top of the mountain would rush through the passageway, and all three youngsters would cling to the footholds with their very lives, hoping that the wind would not blow them back down to the cave floor. But although the Baudelaires found it necessary to keep climbing through the rest of the dark day so they could reach the headquarters as quickly as possible, and I find it necessary to finish describing it so my account of the Baudelaire case is as accurate and as complete as possible, it is not necessary for you to finish reading the rest of this chapter so you can be as miserable as possible. My description of the Baudelaire's journey up through the road less traveled begins on the next page, but I beg you not to travel along with them. Instead, you may take a page from Bruce's book and skip ahead to chapter 6 and find my report on Sonny Baudelaire's tribulations, a word which here means opportunities to eavesdrop while cooking for a theater troupe, with Count Olaf. Or you could skip ahead to chapter 7 when the elder Baudelaires arrive at the site of the VFD headquarters and unmask the stranger who led them there. Or you may take the road very frequently traveled and skip away from this book altogether and find something better to do with your time besides finishing this unhappy tale and becoming a weary, weeping, and well-read person. The Baudelaire's journey up the vertical flame diversion was so dark and treacherous that it is not enough to write. The Baudelaire journey up the vertical flame diversion was so dark and treacherous that it is not enough to write. The Baudelaire's journey up the vertical flame diversion was so dark and treacherous that it is not enough to write. The Baudelaire's journey up the vertical flame diversion was so dark and treacherous that it is not enough to write. The Baudelaire's journey up the vertical flame diversion was so dark and treacherous that it is not enough to write. My dear sister, I am taking a great risk in hiding a letter to you inside one of my books, but I am certain that even the most melancholy and well-read people in the world have found my account of the lives of the 3 Baudelaire children even more wretched than I'd promised. And so this book will stay on the shelves of libraries, utterly ignored, waiting for you to open it and find this message. As an additional precaution, I have placed a warning that the rest of this chapter contains a description of the Baudelaire's miserable journey up the vertical flame diversion, so anyone who has the courage to reach such a description is probably brave enough to read my letter to you. I've at last learned the whereabouts of the evidence that will exonerate me, a phrase which here means prove to the authorities that it is Count Olaf and not me who started so many fires. Your suggestion so many years ago at that picnic that a tea set would be a handy place to hide anything important and small in the event of a dark day has turned out to be correct. Incidentally, your other picnic suggestion that a simple combination of sliced mango, black beans, and chopped celery mixed with black pepper, lime juice, and olive oil would make a delicious chilled salad also turned out to be correct. I am on my way now to the Valley of Four Draughts in order to continue my research on the Baudelaire case. I also hope to retrieve the aforementioned evidence at last. It is too late to restore my happiness, of course, but at least I can clear my name. From the site of VFD headquarters, I will head straight for the Hotel Denouement. I should arrive by, well, it wouldn't be wise to type the date, but it should be easy for you to remember Beatrice's birthday. Meet me at the hotel. Try to get us a room without ugly curtains. With all due respect, Lemony Snicket. P.S. If you substitute the chopped celery with hearts of palm, it is equally delicious. End of chapter 5. Hi, Rock Rules. How's it going? Enjoy your laundry. Thank you for the host, Terror. Get that laundry done. I know that feel. I was doing that earlier. They have a Star Wars area at Shanghai Disney and a Pirates of the Caribbean ride. Yes. I've also heard they have one of the best haunted mansion to date. Thank you for the claps. Thank you for the claps. I'm doing pretty good today, Rock. I hope you're doing well. I hope you can make time for it. That would be amazing. Okay. So that was the end of chapter 5. And we might as well just keep pressing on. It's called Mystic Manor or Phantom Manor or something like that. Pardon me just a second. I just need to respond to a message. Okay. They also have a Marvel universe. Ooh. This would be so fun if you end up going. Thank you, Rock. I'm glad you're enjoying. Music levels, I assume, are good because nobody said otherwise. All right, I'm going to just press along. Chapter 6. In the very early hours of the morning, while the 2 elder Baudelaires struggled to find their footing as they climbed up the vertical flame diversion, and I sincerely hope that you did not read the description of that journey, the youngest Baudelaire found herself struggling with a different sort of footing altogether. Sunny had not enjoyed the long, cold night on Mount Fraught. If you have ever slept in a covered casserole dish on the highest peak of a mountain range, then you know that it is an uncomfortable place to lay one's head, even if you find a dish towel inside that can serve as a blanket. All night long, the chilly mountain winds blew through the tiny holes inside the top of the cover, making it so cold inside the dish that Sunny's enormous teeth chattered all night, giving her tiny cuts on her lips and making such a loud noise that it was impossible to sleep. Finally, when the first rays of the morning sun shone through the holes and made it warm enough to doze, Count Olaf left his tent and kicked open the cover of the dish to begin ordering Sunny around. "Wake up, you dentist nightmare!" he cried. Sunny opened one exhausted eye and found herself staring at the villain's footing, particularly the tattoo on Olaf's left ankle, a sight that was enough to make her wish her eyes were still closed. Tattooed on Olaf's ankle was the image of an eye, and it seemed to Sunny that this eye had been watching the Baudelaires throughout all of their troubles, from their day on Briny Beach when they learned of the terrible fire that destroyed their home. Time after time, Count Olaf had tried to hide this eye so the authorities would not recognize him, so the children were always uncovering it from behind his ridiculous disguises, and the Baudelaires had begun seeing the eye in other places, such as at the office of an evil hypnotist, on the side of a carnival tent, on Esme Squaller's purse, and on a necklace owned by a mysterious fortune teller. It was almost as if this eye had replaced the eyes of their parents, but instead of keeping watch over the children and making sure that they were safe from harm, this eye merely gave them a blank stare, as if it did not care about the children's troubles or could do nothing about them. If you looked very closely, you could find the letters VFD half hidden in the eye, and this reminded Sunny of all the sinister secrets that surrounded the three siblings, and how far they were from understanding the web of mystery in which they found themselves. But it is hard to think about mysteries and secrets first thing in the morning, particularly if someone is yelling at you, and Sunny turned her attention to what her captor was saying. "You'll be doing all the cooking and cleaning for us, orphan," Count Olaf said, "and you can start by making us breakfast. We will have a big day ahead of us, and a good breakfast will give me and my troop the energy we need to perform unspeakable crimes." "Plakna?" Sunny asked, which meant, how am I supposed to cook breakfast on top of a freezing mountain? But Count Olaf just gave her a nasty smile. "Too bad your brain isn't as big as your teeth, you little monkey," he said. "You're talking nonsense as usual." Sunny sighed, frustrated that there was no one on top of the Mortmain Mountains who understood what she was trying to say. "Translo," she said, which meant, just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that it's nonsense. "There you go, babbling again," Olaf said, and tossed Sunny the car keys. "Get the groceries out of the trunk of the car and get to work." Sunny suddenly thought of something that might cheer her up a little bit. "Sneak it ock," she said, which was her way of saying, "Of course, because you don't understand me, I can say anything I want to you, and you'll have no idea what I'm talking about." "I'm getting quite tired of your ridiculous speech impediment," Count Olaf said. "Brummel," Sunny said, which meant, in my opinion, you desperately need a bath, and your clothing is a shambles. "Be quiet this instant," Olaf ordered. "Bushany," Sunny said, which meant something along the lines of, "You're an evil man with no concern whatsoever for other people." "Shut up!" Count Olaf roared. "Shut up and get cooking." Sunny got out of the casserole dish and stood up, looking down at the snowy ground so the villain would not see she was smiling. It's not nice to tease people, of course, but the youngest Baudelaire felt it was all right to enjoy a joke at the expense of such a murderous and evil man, and she walked to Olaf's car with a spring in her step, a phrase which here means in a surprisingly cheerful manner considering she was in the clutches of a ruthless villain on top of a mountain so cold that even the nearby waterfall was frozen solid. But when Sunny Baudelaire opened the trunk of her car, her smile faded. Under normal circumstances, it is not safe to keep groceries in the trunk of a car for an extended period of time because some foods will spoil without being refrigerated. But Sunny saw that the temperatures of the Mortmain Mountains had caused the groceries to become over-refrigerated. A thin layer of frost covered every item, and Sunny had to crawl inside and wipe the frost off with her bare hands to see what she might make for the troop. There was a variety of well-chilled food that Olaf had stolen from the carnival, but none of it seemed like the makings of a good breakfast. There was a bag of coffee beans beneath a harpoon gun and a frozen hunk of spinach, but there was no way to grind the beans into tiny pieces to make coffee. Near a picnic basket and a large bag of mushrooms was a jug of orange juice, but it had been close to one of the bullet holes in the trunk, and so had frozen completely solid in the cold. And after Sunny moved aside 3 chunks of cold cheese, a large can of water chestnuts, and an eggplant as big as herself, She finally found a small jar of boysenberry jam and a loaf of bread she could use to make toast, although it was so cold it felt more like a log than a breakfast ingredient. "Wake up!" Sunny peeked out of the trunk and saw Count Olaf calling through the door of one of the tents she had assembled. "Wake up and get dressed for breakfast!" "Can't we sleep 10 minutes more?" asked the whiny voice of the hook-handed man. "I was having a lovely dream about sneezing without covering my nose and mouth and giving everybody germs." "Absolutely not," Olaf replied. "I have lots of work for you to do." "But Olaf," said Esme Squalor, emerging from the tent she had shared with Count Olaf. Her hair was in curlers and she was wearing a long robe and a pair of fuzzy slippers. "I need a little while to choose what I'm going to wear. It's not in to burn down a headquarters without wearing a fashionable outfit." Sunny gasped in the trunk. She had known that Olaf was eager to reach the VFD headquarters as soon as possible in order to get his hands on the rest of some crucial evidence, but it had not occurred to her that he would combine this evidence-grabbing with his usual pyromania, a word which here means a love of fire, usually the product of a deranged mind. "I can't imagine why you need all this time," was Count Olaf's grumpy reply to his girlfriend. "After all, I wear the same outfit for weeks at a time, except when I'm in disguise, and I look almost unbearably handsome. Well, I suppose you have a few minutes before breakfast is ready. Slow service is one of the disadvantages of having infants for slaves." Olaf strode over to the car and peered in at Sunny, who was still clutching the loaf of bread. "Hurry up, Big Mouth," he growled at Sunny. "I need a nice hot meal to take the chill out of the morning." "Unfeezy," Sunny cried. By unfeezy, she meant to make a hot meal without any electricity. I'd need a fire, and expecting a baby to start a fire all by herself on top of a snowy mountain is cruelly impossible and impossibly cruel. But Olaf merely frowned. "Your baby talk is really starting to annoy me," he said. "Hygiene," Sunny said to make herself feel better. She meant something along the lines of, "Additionally, you ought to be ashamed of yourself for wearing the same outfit for weeks at a time without washing." But Olaf merely scowled at her and walked back to his tent. Sunny looked at the cold ingredients and tried to think. Even if she had been old enough to start a fire by herself, Sunny had been nervous around flames since the fire that had destroyed the Baudelaire mansion. But as she thought of the fire that destroyed her own home, she remembered something her mother had told her once. They had both been busy in the kitchen. Sunny's mother was busy preparing for a fancy luncheon, and Sunny was busy dropping a fork on the floor over and over again to see what sort of sound it made. The luncheon was due to start any minute, and Sunny's mother was quickly mixing up a salad of sliced mango, black beans, and chopped celery mixed with black pepper, lime juice, and olive oil. "This isn't a very complicated recipe, Sunny," her mother had said, "but if I arrange the salad very nicely on fancy plates, people will think I've been cooking all day. Often when cooking, the presentation of the food is just as important as the food itself." Thinking of what her mother had said, she opened the picnic basket in Olaf's trunk and found that it contained a set of elegant plates, each emblazoned with the familiar eye insignia, and a small tea set. Then she rolled up her sleeves, an expression here which means focused very hard on the task at hand, but did not actually roll up her sleeves because it was very cold on the highest peak of the Mortmain Mountains, and got to work as Count Olaf and his comrades started their day. "I'll use these blankets for a tablecloth," Sunny heard Olaf say in the tent over the sound her own teeth were making. "Good idea," she heard Esme replied. "It's very in to dine al fresco." "What does that mean?" Olaf asked. "It means outside, of course," Esme explained. "It's fashionable to eat your meals in the fresh air." "I knew what it meant," Count Olaf replied. "I was just testing you." "Hey, boss," Hugo called from the next tent. "Colette won't share the dental floss." "There's no reason to use dental floss," Count Olaf said, "unless you're trying to strangle someone with a very weak neck." "Kevin, would you do me a favor?" the hook-handed man asked as Sunny struggled to open the jug of juice. "Will you help me comb my hair? These hooks can make it difficult sometimes." "I'm jealous of your hooks," Kevin replied. "Having no hands is better than having two equally strong hands." "Don't be ridiculous," one of the white-faced women replied. "Having a white face is worse than both of your situations." "But you have a white face because you put makeup on," Colette said as Sunny climbed back out of the trunk and knelt down in the snow. "You're putting powder on your face right now." "Must you bicker every single morning?" Count Olaf asked, and stomped back out of his tent carrying a blanket covered in images of eyes. Somebody take this blanket and set the table over there on that flat rock. Hugo walked out of the tent and smiled at his new boss. I'd be happy to, he said. Esme stepped outside, having changed into a bright red snowsuit, and put her arm around Olaf. Fold the blanket into a large triangle, she said to Hugo. That's the in way to do it. Yes, ma'am, Hugo said, and if you don't mind my saying so, that's a very handsome snowsuit you're wearing. The villainous girlfriend turned all the way around to show off her outfit from every angle. Sunny looked up from her cooking and noticed that the letter B was sewn into the back of it, along with the eye insignia. I'm glad you like it, Hugo, Esme said. It's stolen. Count Olaf glanced at Sunny and quickly stepped in front of his girlfriend. What are you staring at, Toothy? He asked. Are you done making breakfast? Almost, Sunny replied. That infant never makes any sense, Hugo said. No wonder she fooled us into thinking she was a carnival freak. Sunny sighed, but no one heard her over the scornful laughter of Olaf's troop. One by one, the villain's wretched employees emerged from the tent and strolled over to the flat rock where Hugo was laying out the blanket. One of the white-faced women glanced at Sunny and gave her a small smile, but nobody offered to help her finish with the breakfast preparations, or even to set the table with the eye-patterned dishes. Instead, they gathered around the rock, talking and laughing until Sunny carefully carried the breakfast over to them, arranged on a large eye-shaped tray she'd found in the bottom of the picnic basket. Although she was still frightened to be in Olaf's clutches and worried about her siblings, Sunny could not help but be a little proud as Count Olaf and his comrades looked at the meal she'd prepared. Sunny had kept in mind what her mother had said about presentation being as important as the food itself, and managed to put together a lovely breakfast despite the difficult circumstances. First, she had opened the jug of frozen orange juice and used a small spoon to chip away at the ice until she had a large heap of juice shavings, which she arranged into tiny piles on each place to make orange granita, a cold and delicious concoction that's often served at fancy dinner parties and masked balls. Then, Sunny had rinsed her mouth out with melted snow so it would be as clean as possible, and chopped some of the coffee beans with her teeth. She placed a bit of the ground coffee inside each cup and combined it with more snow she'd melted in her own hands to make iced coffee, a delicious beverage I first enjoyed when visiting Thailand to interview a taxi driver. Meanwhile, the youngest Baudelaire had put the chilled bread underneath her shirt to warm it up, and when it was warm enough to eat, she put one slice on each plate and using a small spoon, spread some boysenberry jam on each piece of bread. She did her best to spread the jam in the shape of an eye to please the villains who would be eating it, and as a finishing touch, she found a bouquet of ivy, which Count Olaf had given his girlfriend not so long ago, and placed it in the small pitcher of the tea set used for cream. There was no cream, but the ivy would help the presentation of the food by serving as a centerpiece, a word which here means a decoration placed in the middle of a table, often used to distract people from the food. Of course, orange granita and iced coffee are not often served at al fresco breakfasts on cold mountain peaks, and bread with jam is more traditionally prepared as toast, but without a source of heat or any other cooking equipment, Sunny had done the best she could, and she hoped that Olaf and his troop might appreciate her efforts. Café Fredde, sorbet, toast tartare, she announced. What is this? Count Olaf said suspiciously, peering into his coffee cup. It looks like coffee, but it's freezing cold. And what is this orange stuff? Esme asked suspiciously. I want fashionable inn food, not a handful of ice. Colette picked up a piece of bread and stared at it suspiciously. This toast feels raw, she said. Is it safe to eat raw toast? Of course not, Hugo said. I bet that baby is trying to poison us. Actually, the coffee isn't bad, one of the white-faced women said. Even if it is a little bitter. Could someone please pass the sugar? Sugar! Shrieked Count Olaf, erupting in anger. He stood up, grabbed one end of the blanket, and pulled as hard as he could, scattering all of Sunny's hard work. Food, beverages, and dishes fell everywhere, and Sunny had to duck to avoid getting hit on the head with a flying fork. All the sugar in the world couldn't save this terrible breakfast, he roared, and then leaned down so his shiny, shiny eyes stared right into Sunny's. I told you to make a nice, hot breakfast, and you gave me cold, disgusting nonsense, he said, his smelly breath making a cloud in the chilly air. Don't you see how high up we are, you saber-toothed papoose? If I threw you off Mount Fraught, you'd never survive. Olaf, Esme said, I'm surprised at you. Surely you remember that we'll never get the Baudelaire fortune if we toss Sunny off the mountain. We have to keep Sunny alive for the greater good." "Yes, yes," Count Olaf said. "I remember. I'm not going to throw the orphan off the mountain. I just wanted to terrify her." He gave Sunny a cruel smirk and then turned to the hook-handed man. "Walk over to that frozen waterfall," he said. "Crack a hole in the ice with your hook. The stream's full of stricken salmon. Catch enough for all of us and we'll have the baby prepare us a proper meal." "Good idea, Olaf," the hook-handed man said, standing up and walking toward the icy slope. "You're as smart as you are intelligent." "Sakusushi," Sunny said quietly, which meant, "I don't think you'll enjoy salmon if it's not cooked." "Stop your baby talk and wash these dishes," Olaf ordered. "They're covered in lousy food." "You know, Olaf," said the white-faced woman who had asked for sugar, "it's none of my business, but we might put someone else in charge of cooking. It was probably difficult for the baby to prepare a hot breakfast without a fire." "But there is a fire," said a deep, low voice, and everyone turned around to see who had arrived. Having an aura of menace is like having a pet weasel, because you rarely meet someone who has one, and when you do, it makes you want to hide under the coffee table. An aura of menace is simply a distinct feeling of evil that accompanies the arrival of certain people, and very few individuals are evil enough to produce an aura of menace that is very strong. Count Olaf, for example, had an aura of menace that the three Baudelaires had felt the moment they met him, but a number of other people never seemed to sense that a villain was in their midst, even when Olaf was standing right next to them with an evil gleam in his eye. But when two visitors arrived at the highest peak of the Mortmain Mountains, their aura of menace was unmistakable. Sunny gasped when she saw them. Esme Squalor shuddered in her snowsuit. The members of Olaf's troop, all except the hook-handed man who was busy fishing for salmon and was so lucky enough to miss the visitors' arrival, gazed down at the snowy ground rather than take a further look at them. Count Olaf himself looked a bit nervous as the man, the woman, and their aura of menace drew closer and closer. And even I, after all this time, can feel their aura of menace so strongly just by writing about these two people that I dare not say their names, and will refer instead to them, the way everyone else who dares to refer to them refers to them, as the man with a beard but no hair, and the woman with hair but no beard. "It's good to see you, Olaf," continued the deep voice, and Sunny realized that the voice belonged to the sinister-looking woman. She was dressed in a suit made of strange blue fabric that was very shiny, decorated with two large pads, one on each shoulder. She was dragging a wooden toboggan, a word which here means a sled big enough to hold several people, which made an eerie scraping sound against the cold ground. "I was worried that the authorities might have captured you." "You look well," said the man with a beard but no hair. He was dressed identically to the woman with hair but no beard, but his voice was very hoarse, as if he'd been screaming for hours and could hardly talk. "It's been a long time since we've laid eyes on one another." The man gave Olaf a grin that made it seem even colder on the mountain peak, and then stopped and helped the woman lean the toboggan against the rock where Sunny had served breakfast. The youngest Baudelaire saw that the toboggan was painted with the familiar eye insignia, and had a few long leather straps, presumably used for steering. Count Olaf coughed lightly into his hand, which is something people often do when they cannot think of what to say. "Hello," he said a bit nervously. "Did I hear you say something about a fire?" The man with a beard but no hair and the woman with hair but no beard looked at one another and shared a laugh that made Sunny cover her ears with her hands. "Haven't you noticed," the woman said, "that there are no snow gnats around?" "We had noticed that," Esme said. "I thought maybe snow gnats were no longer in." "Don't be ridiculous, Esme," said the man with a beard but no hair. He reached out and kissed Esme's hand, which Sunny could see was trembling. "The gnats aren't around because they can smell the smoke." "I don't smell anything," said Hugo. "Well, if you were a tiny insect, you'd smell something," replied the woman with hair but no beard. "If you were a snow gnat, you'd smell the smoke from the VFD headquarters." "We did you a favor, Olaf," the man said. "We burned the entire place down." "No!" Sunny cried before she could stop herself. By no, she meant, "I certainly hope that isn't true, because my siblings and I hope to reach VFD headquarters, solve the mysteries that surround us, and perhaps find one of our parents." But she had not planned to say it out loud. The two visitors looked down at the youngest Baudelaire, casting their aura of menace in her direction. "What is that?" asked the man with a beard but no hair. "That's the youngest Baudelaire," replied Esme. "We've eliminated the other two, but we're keeping this one around to do our bidding until we can finally steal the fortune." The woman with hair but no beard nodded. "Infant servants are troublesome," she said. "I had an infant servant once, a long time ago, before the schism." "Before the schism," Olaf said, and Sunny wished Klaus were with her because the baby did not know what the word schism meant. "That is a long time ago. That infant must be all grown up by now." "Not, necessarily," the woman said, and laughed again while her companion leaned down to gaze at Sunny. Sunny could not bear to look into the eyes of the man with a beard but no hair, and instead looked down at his shiny shoes. "So this is Sunny Baudelaire," he said in his strange, hoarse voice. "Well, well, well, I've heard so much about this little orphan. She's caused almost as many problems as her parents did." He stood up again and looked around at Olaf and his troop. "But we know how to solve problems, don't we? Fire can solve any problem in the world." He began to laugh, and the woman with hair but no beard laughed along with him. Nervously, Count Olaf began to laugh too, and then glared at his troop until they laughed along with him, and Sunny found herself surrounded by tall, laughing villains. "Oh, but it was wonderful," said the woman with hair but no beard. "First we burned down the kitchen, then we burned down the dining room, then we burned down the parlor, and then the disguise center, the movie room, and the stables. Then we moved on to the gymnasium, and the training center, and the garage, and all 6 of the laboratories. We burned down the dormitories and schoolrooms, the lounge, the theater, and the music room, as well as the museum and the ice cream shop. Then we burned down the rehearsal studios and the testing centers and the swimming pool, which was very hard to burn down. Then we burned down all the bathrooms, and then finally, we burned down the VFD library last night. That was my favorite part. Books and books and books, all turned to ashes so no one could read them. You should have been there, Olaf. Every morning we lit fires, and every evening we celebrated with a bottle of wine and some finger puppets. We've been wearing these fireproof suits for almost a month. It's been a marvelous time." "Why did you burn it down gradually?" Count Olaf asked. "When I burn something down, I do it all at once." "We couldn't have burned down the entire headquarters at once," said the man with a beard but no hair. "Someone would have spotted us. Remember, where there's smoke, there's fire." "But if you burn the headquarters down room by room," Esme said, "didn't all of the volunteers escape?" "They were gone already," said the man, and scratched his head where his hair might have been. "The entire headquarters was deserted. It was as if they knew we were coming." "Oh well, you can't win 'em all." "Maybe we'll find some of them when we burn down the carnival," said the woman in her deep, deep voice. "Carnival?" Olaf asked nervously. "Yes," the woman said, and scratched the place where her beard would have been if she had one. "There's an important piece of evidence that VFD has hidden in a figurine sold at Caligari Carnival, so we need to go burn it down." "I burned it down already," Count Olaf said. "The whole place?" the woman asked in surprise. "The whole place," Olaf said, giving her a nervous smile. "Congratulations," she said in a deep purr. "You're better than I thought, Olaf." Count Olaf looked relieved, as if he had not been sure whether the woman was going to compliment him or kick him. "Well, it's all for the greater good," he said. "As a reward," the woman said, "I have a gift for you, Olaf." Sunny watched as the woman reached into the pocket of her shiny suit and drew out a stack of paper tied together with thick rope. The paper looked very old and worn, as if it had been passed around to a variety of different people, hidden in a number of secret compartments, and perhaps even divided into different piles, driven around a city in horse-drawn carriages, and then put back together at midnight in the back room of a bookstore disguised as a cafe, disguised as a sporting goods store. Count Olaf's eyes grew very wide and very shiny, and he reached his filthy hands toward it as if it were the Baudelaire fortune itself. "The Snicket file," he said in a hushed whisper. "It's all here," the woman said. "Every chart, every map, every photograph from the only file that could put us all in jail." "It's complete except for page 13, of course," the man said. "We understand the Baudelaires managed to steal that page from Heimlich Hospital." The 2 visitors glared down at Sunny Baudelaire, who couldn't help whimpering in fear. "Search me," she said. She meant something along the lines of, "I don't have it, my siblings do," but she did not need a translator. "The older orphans have it," Olaf said, "but I'm fairly certain they're dead." "Then all of our problems have gone up in smoke," said the woman with hair but no beard. Count Olaf grabbed the file and held it to his chest as if it were a newborn baby, although he was not the sort of person to treat a newborn baby very kindly. "This is the most wonderful gift in the world," he said. "I'm gonna go read it right now." "We'll all read it together," said the woman with hair but no beard. "It contains secrets we all ought to know." "But first," said the man with a beard but no hair, "I have a gift for your girlfriend, Olaf." "For me?" Esme asked. "I found these in one of the rooms of headquarters," the man said. "I've never seen one before, but it has been quite some time since I was a volunteer." With a sly smile, he reached into his pocket and took out a small green tube. "What is that?" Esme asked. "I think it's a cigarette," the man said. "A cigarette," Esme said with a smile as big as Olaf's. "How in?" "I thought you'd enjoy them," the man said. "Here, try it. I happen to have quite a few matches right here." The man with a beard but no hair struck a match, lit the end of the green tube, and offered it to the wicked girlfriend, who grabbed it and held it to her mouth. A bitter smell like that of burning vegetables filled the air, and Esme Squalor began to cough. "What's the matter?" asked the woman in her deep voice. "I thought you liked things that are in." "I do," Esme said, and then coughed quite a bit more. Sunny was reminded of Mr. Poe, who was always coughing and into a handkerchief, and as Esme coughed and finally dropped the green tube to the ground, where it spewed out a dark green smoke. "I love cigarettes," she explained to the man with a beard but no hair, "but I prefer to smoke them with a long holder because I don't like the smell or taste and because they're very bad for you." "Never mind that now," Count Olaf said impatiently. "Let's go into my tent and read this file." He started to walk toward the tent, but stopped and glared at his comrades, who were beginning to follow him. "The rest of you stay here," he said. "There are secrets in this file that I do not want you to know." The two sinister visitors began to laugh, and followed Count Olaf and Esme into the tent, closing the flap behind them. Sunny stood with Hugo, Colette, Kevin, and the two white-faced women, and stared after them in silence, waiting for the aura of menace to disappear. "Who were those people?" asked the hook-handed man, and everyone turned to see that he'd returned from his fishing expedition. 4 salmon hung from each of his hooks, dripping with the waters of the stricken stream. "I don't know," said one of the white-faced women, "but they made me very nervous." "If they're friends of Count Olaf's," Kevin asked, "how bad could they be?" The members of the troop looked at one another, but no one answered the ambidextrous person's question. "What did that man mean when he said, 'Where there's smoke, there's fire'?" Hugo asked. "I don't know," Colette said. A chilly wind blew, and Sunny watched her contort her body in the breeze until it looked almost as curvy as the smoke from the green tube Esme had dropped. "Forget those questions," the hook-handed man said. "My question is, how are you going to prepare this salmon, orphan?" Olaf's henchman was looking down at Sunny, but the youngest Baudelaire did not answer for a moment. Sunny was thinking, and her siblings would have been proud of her for the way she was thinking. Klaus would have been proud because she was thinking about the phrase, "Where there's smoke, there's fire," and what that might mean. And Violet would have been proud because she was thinking about the salmon that the hook-handed man was holding, and what she might invent that would help her. Sunny stared at the hook-handed man and thought as hard as she could, and she felt almost as if both siblings were with her, Klaus helping her think about a phrase and Violet helping her think about an invention. "Answer me, baby," the hook-handed man growled. "What are you going to make for us out of this salmon?" "Locks," Sunny said, but it was as if all 3 of the Baudelaires had answered that question. End of chapter 6. Dang, that was a long chapter. Let me catch up. Hope you're enjoying Smash Bros. Creepy looking Shipwreck Cove. What is that? How you doing, Terror? Thank you for shouting out Paige and Terror. Such bickerage. Pro bickerage. You tried, Sunny. Raw toast. Hey, Mecca, how's it going? Raw toast is cold, obviously. I often give cold, disgusting nonsense. Nah. Thank you for shouting out Mecca. He definitely deserves it. The baby, yeah. Aura of Mecca. I carry an aura of bad video games and raw toast. Those Tony Hawk games are great. I bet this baby Sunny can do a kickflip. I don't know what that means. Sunny can grind like a pro. Retweet if you celebrate with finger puppets. Does anyone else think of that baby from Twilight Princess? Are you talking about Mallow? Yeah. Owner of my Mallow voice. I should do Mallow voice. Laundry to kitchen cleaning. I hope you enjoy your kitchen cleaning. Thank you for clapping and clapping and alert clapping. A kick. Oh no, I was reading. I know what a kickflip is. Rock Rules had said I don't know what that means. Yeah. Okay, my Mallow voice. So he's like, "Hey, buy something." Hey, Link, how's it going? Donate to the cause. Buy something, will ya? That hurts my voice, though. Me and my best friend are going through Twilight Princess on Wednesdays for our best Wednesday. And she does all the playing and I do all the voices, and that's the voice I gave Mallow. A true gremlin. Oh, schism? A schism is like the best way I can describe it is it's a dividing, usually within like a group of people. So if there's like a dividing of opinions or ways, there's a schism where like people pick sides as to what they believe is right, and then they usually separate, so they're no longer like one unit of people. They separate because of a schism, and it's usually not a positive thing. It's usually it's got a negative connotation to it. So there you go. A split or division between strongly opposed sections or parties caused by differences in opinion or belief. There you go. All right. That was only 2 chapters. I wonder if what are the next chapters looking like? That was a very long chapter. That was like the first, chapter 6 was only like 8 minutes or something. So chapter 6 is just a long chapter. I'm going to try to do 7, 8, and 9 before I finish today. And then we'll do 10, 11, 12, and 13 the third time I go through this book. I'm not going to MomoCon. I wish I had the money to just, like, go to all of these things. The book has 13 chapters. I just finished chapter 6. So, almost halfway done. Okay. I also have some OJ, which I might take a sip of real quick. No con. How's the music? Is it alright? Okay. Chapter 7. An associate of mine once wrote a novel called Corridors of Power, which told the story of various people discussing how the world has become a corrupt and dangerous place, and whether or not there are enough people with the integrity and decency necessary to keep the entire planet from descending into despair. I have not read this novel in several years because I participate in enough discussions on how the world has become a corrupt and dangerous place, and whether or not there are enough people with the integrity and decency necessary to keep the entire planet from descending into despair, without reading about it in my leisure time. But, nevertheless, the phrase corridors of power has come to mean the hushed and often secret places where important matters are discussed. Whether or not they are actual corridors, the corridors of power tend to feel quiet and mysterious. If you have ever walked inside an important building, such as the main branch of a library or the office of a dentist who has agreed to disguise your teeth, then you may have experienced this feeling that accompanies the corridors of power. And Violet and Klaus Baudelaire experienced it as they reached the end of the vertical flame diversion, and followed the mysterious sweatered scout as he climbed out of the secret passageway. Even through their masks, the two siblings could sense that they were in an important place, even though it was nothing more than a dim, curved hallway with a small grate on the ceiling where the morning light was shining through. "That's where the smoke escapes from the Snow Scout's fire," whispered the mysterious scout, pointing up at the ceiling. "That leads to the very center of the Valley of Four Drafts, so the smoke is scattered to the four winds. VFD doesn't want anyone to see the smoke." "Where there's smoke," Violet said, "there's fire." "Exactly," the scout said. "Anyone who saw smoke coming from this high up in the mountains might become suspicious and investigate. In fact, I found a device that works exactly according to this principle. He reached into his backpack and drew out a small rectangular box filled with small green tubes, exactly like the one that Sunny had seen the man with the beard but no hair give to Esme Squalor. "No thank you," Violet said. "I don't smoke." "I don't either," the scout said, "but these aren't cigarettes. These are verdant, flammable devices." Verdant means green, so when you light one, it gives out a dark green smoke, so another volunteer will know where you are. Klaus took the box from the scout and squinted at it in the dim light. "I've seen a box like this before," he said, "in my father's desk when I was looking for a letter opener. I remember thinking it was strange to find them because he didn't smoke." "He must have been hiding them," Violet said. "Why was he keeping them a secret?" "This entire organization is a secret," the scout said. "It was very difficult for me to learn the secret location of the headquarters." "It was difficult for us, too," Klaus said. "We found it in a coded map." "I had to draw my own map," the scout said, and reached into a pocket in his sweater. He turned on the flashlight, and the two Baudelaires could see he was holding a notebook with a dark purple cover. "What is that?" Violet asked. "It's a commonplace book," the scout said. "Whenever I find something that seems important or interesting, I write it down. That way all my important information is in one place." "I should start one," Klaus said. "My pockets are bulging with scraps of paper." "From information I read in Dr. Montgomery's book and a few others," the scout said, "I managed to draw a map of where to go from here." He opened the purple notebook and flipped a few pages until he reached a small but elegant rendering of the cave, the vertical flame diversion, and the hallway in which they were standing now. "As you can see," he said, running his finger along the hallway, "the passageway branches off in two directions." "This is a very well-drawn map," Violet said. "Thank you," the scout replied. "I've been interested in cartography for quite some time. See, if we go to the left, there's a small area used for sled and snowsuit storage, at least according to a newspaper article I found. But if we go right, we'll arrive at the vernacularly fastened door, which should open into the headquarters kitchen. We might walk in on the entire organization having breakfast." The two Baudelaires looked at one another through their masks, and Violet put a hand on her brother's shoulder. They did not dare to say out loud their hope that one of their parents might just be around the corner. "Let's go," Violet whispered. The scout nodded silently in agreement, and led the Baudelaires down the hallway, which seemed to get colder and colder with every step. But now they were so far from Bruce and the Snow Scouts that there was no need to whisper, but all three children kept quiet as they walked down the dim, curved hallway, hushed by the feeling of the corridors of power. At last they reached a large metal door with a strange device where the doorknob should have been. The device looked a bit like a spider, with curly wires spreading out in all directions, but where the head of the spider might have been was the keyboard of a typewriter. Even in her excitement to see the headquarters, Violet's inventing mind was interested to see such a device, and she leaned closer to see what it was. "Wait," the sweatered scout said, reaching his arm out to stop her. "This is a coded lock. If we don't operate it properly, we won't be able to get into the headquarters." "How does it work?" Violet said, shivering slightly in the cold. "I'm not sure," the scout admitted, and took out his commonplace book again. "It's called the vernacularly fastened door, so it operates on language," Klaus finished. "Vernacular is a word for a local language or dialect." "Of course," Violet said. "See how the wires are curled around the hinges of the door? They're locked in place unless you type in the right sequence of letters on that keyboard. There are more letters than numbers, so it would be more difficult for someone to guess the combination of the lock." "That's what I read," the scout confirmed, looking at a page in his notebook. "You're supposed to type in 3 specific phrases in a row. The phrases change every season, so volunteers need to have a lot of information at their fingertips to use this door. The first is the name of the scientist most widely credited with the discovery of gravity." "That's easy," Violet said, and typed in SIRISAACNEWTON, the name of a physicist she'd always admired. When she was finished, there was a muted clicking sound from the typewriter keyboard as if the device was warming up. "The second is the Latin name for the volunteer feline detectives," the scout said. "I found the answer in Remarkable Phenomena of the Mortmain Mountains. It's Panthera leo." He leaned forward and typed in PANTHERALEO. There was a very quiet buzzing sound, and the children saw that the wires near the hinges were shaking very slightly. "It's beginning to unlock," Violet said. "I hope I get a chance to study this invention." "Let's get to the headquarters first," Klaus said. "What's the third phrase?" The scout sighed and turned a page in the commonplace book. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Another volunteer told me that it's the central theme of Leo Tolstoy's novel Anna Karenina, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet." Violet knew that her brother was smiling even though she could not see his face through the mask. She was remembering one summer, very long ago, when Klaus was very young and Sunny was not even conceived. Every summer, the Baudelaire's mother would read a very long book, joking that lifting a large novel was the only exercise she liked to get during the hot months. During the time Violet was thinking of, Mrs. Baudelaire chose Anna Karenina for her summer reading, and Klaus would sit on his mother's lap for hours at a time while she read. The middle Baudelaire had not been reading very long, but their mother helped him with the big words and would occasionally stop reading to explain what had happened in the story, and in this way Klaus and his mother read the story of Miss Karenina, whose boyfriend treats her so poorly that she throws herself under a train. Violet had spent most of that summer studying the laws of thermodynamics and building a miniature helicopter out of an egg beater and some old copper wiring, but she knew that Klaus must remember the central theme of the book he had read on his mother's lap. "The central theme of Anna Karenina," he said, "is that a rural life of moral simplicity, despite its monotony, is the preferable personal narrative to a daring life of impulsive passion, which only leads to tragedy." "That's a very long theme," the scout said. "It's a very long book," Klaus replied, "but I can work quickly. My sisters and I once tapped out a long telegram in no time at all." "Too bad that telegram never arrived," the scout said quietly, but the middle Baudelaire was already pressing the keys on the vernacularly fastened door. As Klaus typed the words "a rural life," a phrase which here means living in the country, the wires began to curl and uncurl very quickly, like worms on a sidewalk after it has rained. And by the time Klaus was typing "the preferable personal narrative," a phrase which here means the way to live your life, the entire door was quivering as if it were as nervous as the Baudelaires. Finally, Klaus typed "Tragedy," and the three children stepped back. But instead of opening, the door stopped shaking and the wires stopped moving and the passageway was dead quiet. "It's not opening," Violet said. "Maybe that isn't the central theme of Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina." "It seemed like it was working until that last word," the scout said. "Maybe the mechanism's a little stuck," Violet said. "Or maybe a daring life of impulsive passion only leads to something else," the scout said, and in some cases this mysterious person was right. A daring life of impulsive passion is an expression which refers to people who follow what is in their hearts, and like people who prefer to follow their head or follow the advice of other people, or follow a mysterious man in a dark blue raincoat, people who lead a daring life of impulsive passion end up doing all sorts of things. For instance, if you ever find yourself reading a book entitled The Bible, you would find the story of Adam and Eve, whose daring life of impulsive passion led to them putting on clothing for the first time in their lives in order to leave the snake-infested garden where they'd been living. Bonnie and Clyde, another famous couple who lived a daring life of impulsive passion, found that it led them to a successful, if short, career in bank robbery. And in my own case, in the few moments where I have led a daring life of impulsive passion, it has led to all sorts of trouble, from false accusations of arson to a broken cufflink I can never have repaired. But in this case, as the Baudelaires stood at the vernacularly fastened door hoping to reach the VFD headquarters, rescue their sister, and see if one of their parents was indeed alive, it was not the sweatered scout but the two Baudelaires who were right. Because in Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, a daring life of impulsive passion leads only to tragedy, as Klaus said, and as Violet said, the mechanism was a little stuck, and after a few seconds the door swung open with a slow and eerie creak. The children stepped through the door, blinking in the sudden light, and stood frozen in their steps. If you have read this far in the Baudelaire's woeful story, then you will not be surprised to learn that the VFD headquarters in the Valley of Four Draughts in the Mortmain Mountains was no more. But Violet and Klaus, of course, were not reading their own story. They were in their own story, and this was the part of their story where they were sick with shock at what they saw. The vernacularly fastened door did not open onto a kitchen. Not anymore. When the Baudelaires followed the mysterious scout through the doorway, they found themselves standing in what at first seemed to be a large field, growing a black and ruined harvest in a valley as cold and drafty as its name. But slowly they saw the charred remains of the grand and impressive building that had stood where the three children were standing. Nearby was a handful of silverware that had survived the blaze, scattered in front of the remnants of a stove, and a refrigerator stood to one side as if it were guarding the ashen remains of the rest of the kitchen. To one side was a pile of burnt wood that had probably once been a large dining table, with a half-melted candelabra sticking out of the top like a baby tree. Farther away, they could see the mysterious shapes of other objects that had survived the fire. A trombone, the pendulum of a grandfather clock, what looked like a periscope or perhaps a spyglass, an ice cream scoop lying forlornly in a pile of ashes encrusted with burnt sugar, and an iron archway emblazoned with the words VFD Library. But there was nothing beyond the archway but piles and piles of blackened remains. It was a devastating sight, and it made Violet and Klaus feel as if they were all alone in a world that had been completely ruined. The only thing they could see that seemed untouched by the fire was a sheer white wall beyond the refrigerator that rose up as far as two siblings could see. It took the Baudelaires a few moments to realize that it was a frozen waterfall, rising up in a slippery slope toward the source of the stricken stream on Mount Fraught, so shiny and white that it made the ruined headquarters look even darker. It must have been beautiful, the sweatered scout said in a quivering voice. He walked toward the waterfall, his feet churning up black dust with every step. I read that there was a large window, he said, moving his gloved hand in the air as if it were still there. When it was your turn to cook, you could look out at the waterfall while you were chopping vegetables or simmering a sauce. It was supposed to be very peaceful, and there was a mechanism just outside this window that turned some of the water from the pool into steam. The steam rose up and covered the headquarters so it couldn't be seen through the blanket of mist. The Baudelaires walked to where the scout was standing and looked into the frozen pool at the bottom of the waterfall. The pool branched off into two tributaries, a word which here means divisions of a river or stream, each twisting off in a different direction past the ruins of the headquarters and curving around the Mortmain Mountains until they disappeared from view. Violet and Klaus gazed sadly at the icy swirls of black and gray they had noticed when they were walking alongside the stricken stream. It was ashes, Klaus said quietly. Ashes from the fire fell into the pool at the bottom of the waterfall, and the stream carried them down the river. Violet found that it was easier to discuss a small specific matter than think about her immense disappointment. But the pool's frozen solid, she said. The stream couldn't have carried the ashes anywhere. It wouldn't have been frozen when it happened, Klaus said. The heat from the fire would have thawed this pool. It must have been awful to see, the sweatered scout said. Violet and Klaus stood with him, imagining the inferno, a word which here means enormous fire that destroyed a secret headquarters high in the mountains. They could almost hear the shattering of glass as the windows fell away and the crackle of the fire as it consumed everything it could. They could almost smell the thick smoke as it floated upward and blackened the sky, and they could almost see the books in the library falling from the burning shelves and tumbling into ashes. The only thing they could not picture was who might have been at the headquarters when the fire began, running out into the freezing cold to avoid the flames. Do you think, Violet said, any of the volunteers... There's no sign anyone was here, the scout said quickly. But how could we know for sure? Klaus asked. There could be a survivor someplace right now. Hello? Violet called, looking around her at the rubble. Hello? She found that her eyes were filling with tears as she called out for the people she knew in her heart were nowhere nearby. The eldest Baudelaire felt as if she'd been calling for these people since that terrible day on the beach, and that if she called them enough, they might appear before her. She thought of all the times she had called them back when she lived with her siblings in the Baudelaire mansion. Sometimes she called them when she wanted them to see something she had invented. Sometimes she called them when she wanted them to know she had arrived home, and sometimes she called them just because she wanted to know where they were. Sometimes Violet just wanted to see them and feel she was safe as long as they were around. Mother? Violet Baudelaire called. Father! There was no answer. Mom! Klaus called. Dad? The Baudelaires heard nothing but the rush of all four of the valley's drafts and a long creak as the vernacularly fastened door blew shut behind them. They saw that the door had been made to look just like the side of the mountain, so that they could scarcely see where they had come from or the way to get back. Now they were truly alone. I know we were all hoping to find people at the headquarters, the sweatered scout said gently. But I don't think anyone is here. I think we're all by ourselves. That's impossible! Klaus cried, and Violet could hear that he was crying. He reached through his layers of clothing until he found his pocket and pulled out page 13 from the Snicket file, which he'd been carrying with him since the Baudelaires had found it at Heimlich Hospital. The page had a photograph of their parents standing with Jacques Snicket and another man the Baudelaires had been unable to identify. And above the photograph was a sentence Klaus had memorized from reading it so many times. "Because of the evidence discussed on page 9, he recited tearfully, experts now suspect that there may be in fact one survivor of the fire, but the survivor's whereabouts are unknown." He walked up to the scout and shook the page in his face. "We thought the survivor would be here," he said. I think the survivor is here," the scout said quietly, and removed his mask to reveal his face at last. "I'm Quigley Quagmire," he said. "I survived the fire that destroyed my home, and I was hoping to find my brother and sister." End of chapter 7. Let me catch up. Super Mario Maker. Sounds fun. Have fun on your lurk. Hey, Emily, if you're still here. Good to see you. Adam and Eve to Bonnie and Clyde. The natural jump. Yeah. It does sound like a lovely valley. It's a shame that it's in ruins. Yay, kitchen is clean. Thank you for the claps. Yeah, gotta have some OJ. Give me just a second. I just need to respond to a message. Okay, I got it, yeah. Vitamin C. We got 2 more chapters. We're at an hour 12, so that's not bad. Maybe I can finish this up in about 2 total hours. That should be pretty good. Okay. Chapter 8. It is one of the peculiar truths of life that people often say things that they know full well are ridiculous. If someone asks you how you are, for example, you might automatically say, "Fine, thank you," when in fact you have just failed an examination or been trampled by an ox. A friend might tell you, "I have lurked everywhere in the world for my keys," when you know they've actually only looked a few places in the immediate area. Once I said to a woman I loved very much, "I'm sure that this trouble will end soon, and you and I will spend the rest of our lives together in happiness and bliss," when I actually suspected that things were about to get much worse. And so it was with the 2 elder Baudelaires when they stood face to face with Quigley Quagmire and found themselves to be saying things they knew were absurd. "But you're dead," Violet said, and took off her mask to make sure she was seeing things clearly. But there was no mistaking Quigley, even though the Baudelaires had never seen him before. He looked so much like Duncan and Isadora that he could only be the 3rd Quagmire triplet. "You perished in a fire along with your parents," Klaus said, but as he took off his mask, he knew this wasn't so. Quigley was even giving the 2 Baudelaires a small smile that looked exactly like his siblings. "No," Quigley said, "I survived, and I've been looking for my siblings ever since." "But how did you survive?" Violet asked. "Duncan and Isadora said the house burned to the ground." "It did," Quigley said sadly. He looked out at the frozen waterfall and sighed deeply. "I suppose I should start at the beginning. I was in my family's library, studying a map of the finite forest, when I heard a shattering of glass and people shouting. My mother ran into the room and said there was a fire. We tried to go out the front door, but the main hall was filled with smoke, so she took me back into the library and lifted a corner of the rug. There was a secret door underneath. She told me to wait down below while she fetched my siblings, and she left me there in the dark. I remember hearing the house falling to pieces above me, and the sound of frantic footsteps and my siblings screaming. Quigley put his mask down on the ground and looked at the two Baudelaires. "But she never came back," he said. "Nobody came back. And when I tried to open the door, something had fallen on top of it, and it wouldn't budge." "How did you get out?" Klaus asked. "I walked," Quigley said. "When it became clear that no one was going to rescue me, I felt around in the dark, and I realized that I was in a sort of passageway. There was nowhere else to go, so I started walking. I've never been so frightened in my life. Walking alone in some dark passageway my parents had kept secret, I couldn't imagine where it would lead." The two Baudelaires looked at one another. They were thinking about the secret passageway they had discovered underneath their home, which they had discovered when they were under the care of Esme Squalor and her husband. "And where did it lead?" Violet said. "To the house of a herpetologist," Quigley said. "At the end of the passageway was a secret door that opened into an enormous room made entirely of glass. The room was filled with empty cages, but it was clear that the room had once housed an enormous collection of reptiles." "We've been there!" Klaus cried in amazement. "That's Uncle Monty's house. He was our guardian, until Count Olaf arrived, disguised as a lab assistant," Quigley finished. "I know, his suitcase was still there." "There was a secret passageway under our house, too," Violet said, "but we didn't discover it until we lived with Esme Squalor." "There are secrets everywhere," Quigley said. "I think everyone's parents have secrets. You just have to know where to look for them." "But why would our parents and yours have tunnels underneath their homes leading to a fancy apartment building and a herpetologist's home?" Klaus said. "It doesn't make any sense." Quigley sighed and put his backpack on the ashen ground next to his mask. "There's a lot that doesn't make sense," he said. "I was hoping to find the answers here, but now I don't know if I'll ever find them." He took out his purple notebook and opened it onto the first page. "All I can tell you is what I have here in this commonplace book." Klaus gave Quigley a small smile and reached into his pockets to retrieve all of the papers he'd stored there. "You tell us what you know," he said, "and we'll tell you what we know, and perhaps together we could answer our own questions." Quigley nodded in agreement, and the three children sat in a circle on what was once the kitchen floor. Quigley opened his backpack and took out a bag of salted almonds, which he passed around. "You must be hungry from the climb up the vertical flame diversion," he said. "I know I am. Let's see, where was I?" "In the reptile room," Violet said, "at the end of the passageway." "Well, nothing happened for a while," Quigley said. "On the doorstep of the house was a copy of the Daily Punctilio, which had an article about the fire. That's how I learned that my parents were dead. I spent days and days there all by myself. I was so sad and so scared, and I didn't know what else to do. I suppose I was waiting for the herpetologist to show up for work and see if he was a friend of my parents and might be of some assistance. The kitchen was filled with food, so I had enough to eat, and every night I slept at the bottom of the stairs so I could hear if anyone came in." The Baudelaires nodded sympathetically, and Violet put a comforting hand on Quigley's shoulder. "We were the same way," Violet said, "right when we heard the news about our parents. I scarcely remember what we did and what we said." "But didn't anyone come looking for you?" Klaus asked. "The Daily Punctilio reported that I died in the fire too," Quigley said. "The article said that my sister and brother were sent off to Prufrock Preparatory School, and that my parents' estate was under the care of the city's sixth most important financial advisor." "Esme Squalor," Violet and Klaus said simultaneously, a word which here means in a disgusted voice and at the exact same time. "Right," Quigley said, "but I wasn't interested in that part of the story. I was determined to go to the school to find my siblings again. I found an atlas in Dr. Montgomery's library, and I studied it until I found Prufrock Preparatory School. It wasn't too far, so I started to gather whatever supplies I could find around his house." "Didn't you think of calling the authorities?" Klaus asked. "I guess I just wasn't thinking very clearly," Quigley admitted. "All I could think of finding was my siblings." "Of course," Violet said. "So what happened then?" "I was interrupted," Quigley said. "Someone walked in just as I was putting the atlas in a tote bag I found. It was Jacques Snicket, although I didn't know who he was, of course. But he knew who I was, and was overjoyed that I was alive after all." "How did you know you could trust him?" Klaus asked. "Well, he knew about the secret passageway," Quigley said. "In fact, he knew quite a bit about my family, even though he hadn't seen my parents in years. And, Violet said. Quigley gave her a small smile. "And he was very well read," he said. "In fact, he was at Dr. Montgomery's house to do a bit more reading. He said there was an important file that was hidden someplace on the premises, and he had to stay for a few days to try to complete his investigation." So he didn't take you to the school? Violet asked. He said it wasn't safe for me to be seen, Quigley said. He explained that he was part of a secret organization and that my parents had been a part of it too. VFD, Klaus said, and Quigley nodded in agreement. Duncan and Isadora tried to tell us about VFD, Violet said, but they never got the chance. We don't even know what it stands for. It seems to stand for many things, Quigley said, flipping pages in his notebook. Nearly everything the organization uses, from the volunteer feline detectives to the vernacularly fastened door, has the same initials. But what is the organization? Violet asked. What is VFD? Jacques wouldn't tell me, Quigley said, but I think the letters stand for Volunteer Fire Department. Volunteer Fire Department, Violet repeated and looked at her brother. What does that mean? In some communities, Klaus said, there's no official fire department, so they rely on volunteers to extinguish fires. I know that, Violet said, but what does that have to do with our parents, or Count Olaf, or anything that's happened to us? I always thought that knowing what the letters stood for would solve this mystery, but I'm as mystified as I ever was. Do you think our parents were secretly fighting fires? Klaus asked. But why would they keep it a secret? Violet asked. And why would they have a secret passageway underneath the house? Jacques said that the passageways were built by members of the organization, Quigley said. In the case of an emergency, they could escape to a safe place. But the tunnel we found connects our house to the home of Esme Squalor, Klaus said. That's not a safe place. Something happened, Quigley said. Something happened that changed everything. He flipped through a few pages of his commonplace book until he found what he was looking for. Jacques Snicket called it a schism, he said, but I don't know what that word means. A schism, Klaus said, is a division of a previously united group of people into two or more oppositional parties. It's like a big argument, and everybody chooses a side. That makes sense, Quigley said. The way Jacques talked, it sounded like the entire organization was now in chaos. Volunteers who were once working together are now enemies. Places that were once safe are now dangerous. Both sides are using the same codes and the same disguises. Even the VFD insignia used to represent the noble ideas everyone shared, but now it's all gone up in smoke. But how did the schism start? Violet asked. What was everyone fighting over? I don't know, Quigley said. Jacques didn't have much time to explain things to me. What was he doing? Klaus asked. He was looking for you, Quigley replied. He showed me a picture of all three of you, waiting at the dock on some lake, and asked me if I'd seen you anywhere. He knew that you'd been placed in Count Olaf's care and all the terrible things that had happened there. He knew you'd gone to live with Dr. Montgomery. He even knew about some of the inventions you made, Violet, and the research you did, Klaus, and some of Sonny's tooth-related exploits. He wanted to find you before it was too late. Too late for what? Violet said. I don't know, Quigley said with a sigh. Jacques spent a long time at Dr. Montgomery's house, but he was too busy conducting his investigation to explain everything to me. He would stay up all night reading and copying information into his notebook, and then sleep all day, or disappear for hours at a time. And then one day he said he had to go interview someone in the town of Paltryville, but he never came back. I waited weeks and weeks for him to return. I read books in Dr. Montgomery's library and started a commonplace book of my own. At first, it was difficult to find any information on VFD, but I took notes on anything I could find. I must have read hundreds of books, but Jacques never returned. Finally, one morning, two things happened that made me decide not to wait any longer. The first was an article in the Daily Punctilio saying my siblings had been kidnapped from the school. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't wait for Jacques Snicket or for anyone else. The Baudelaires nodded in solemn agreement. What was the second thing? Violet asked. Quigley was silent for a moment, and he reached down to the ground and scooped up a handful of ashes, letting them fall from his gloved hands. I smelled smoke, he said, and when I opened the door of the reptile room, I saw that someone had thrown a torch through the glass of the ceiling, starting a fire in the library, and within minutes, the entire house was up in flames. Oh, Violet said quietly. Oh is a word which usually means something along the lines of, I heard you, but I'm not particularly interested. But in this case, of course, the eldest Baudelaire meant something entirely different, and it is something that is difficult to define. She meant, I am sad to hear that Uncle Monty's house is burned down, but that is not all. By oh, Violet was also trying to describe her sadness about all of the fires that had brought Quigley and Klaus and herself here to the Mortmain Mountains, to huddle in a circle and try to solve the mystery that surrounded them. When Violet said, "oh," she was not only thinking of the fire in the reptile room, but the fires that had destroyed the Baudelaire home and the Quagmire home and the Heimlich Hospital and Caligari Carnival and the VFD headquarters, where the smell of smoke still lingered around where the children were sitting. Thinking of all those fires made Violet feel as if the entire world were going up in flames, and that she and her siblings and all the other decent people in the world might never find a place that was truly safe. "Another fire," Klaus murmured, and Violet knew he was thinking the same thing. "Where could you go, Quigley?" "The only place I could think of was Paltryville," Quigley said. "The last time I saw Jacques, he said he was going there. I thought if I went there I might find him again and see if he could help me rescue Duncan and Isadora. Dr. Montgomery's atlas showed me how to get there, but I had to go on foot because I was afraid that anyone who might offer me a ride would be an enemy. It was a long time before I finally arrived, but as soon as I stepped into town I saw a large building that matched the tattoo on Jacques Snicket's ankle. I thought it might be a safe place to go." "Dr. Orwell's office," Klaus cried. "That is not a safe place to go." "Klaus was hypnotized there," Violet explained, "and Count Olaf was disguised as a receptionist," Quigley finished. "I know, his fake nameplate was still on the desk. The office was deserted, but I could tell that Jacques had been there because there were some notes in his handwriting he'd left on the desk. With those notes and the information I read in Dr. Montgomery's library, I learned about the VFD headquarters. So instead of waiting for Jacques again, I set out to find the organization. I thought they were my best hope of rescuing my siblings." "So you set off to the Mortmain Mountains by yourself?" Violet asked. "Not quite by myself," Quigley said. "I had this backpack that Jacques left behind, with the Verdant flammable devices and a few other items, and I had my commonplace books. And eventually I ran into the Snow Scouts and realized that hiding among them would be the quickest way to reach Mount Fraught." He turned a place in his commonplace book and examined his notes. "Remarkable Phenomena of the Mortmain Mountains, which I read in Dr. Montgomery's library, had a hidden chapter that told me all about the vertical flame diversion in the vernacularly fastened door." Klaus looked over Quigley's shoulder to read his notes. "I should have read that book when I had the chance," he said, shaking his head. "If we'd known about VFD when we were living with Uncle Monty, we might have avoided all the trouble that followed." "When we were living with Uncle Monty," Violet reminded him, "we were too busy trying to escape Count Olaf's clutches to do any additional research." "I've had plenty of time to do research," Quigley said, "but I still haven't found all the answers I'm looking for. I still haven't found Duncan and Isadora, and I still don't know where Jacques Snicket is." "He's dead," Klaus said very quietly. "Count Olaf murdered him." "I thought you might say that," Quigley said. "I knew something was very wrong when he didn't return. But what about my siblings? Do you know what happened to them?" "They're safe, Quigley," Violet said. "We think they're safe. We rescued them from Olaf's clutches, and they escaped with a man named Hector." "Escaped?" Quigley repeated. "Where did they go?" "We don't know," Klaus admitted. "Hector built a self-sustaining hot airmobile home. It was like a flying house kept in the air by a bunch of balloons, and Hector said it could stay up in the sky forever. We tried to climb aboard," Violet said, "but Count Olaf managed to stop us." "So you don't know where they are?" Quigley asked. "I'm afraid not," Violet said and patted his hand. "But Duncan and Isadora are intrepid people, Quigley. They survived for quite some time in Olaf's clutches, taking notes on his schemes and trying to pass the information to us." "Violet's right," Klaus said. "I'm sure that wherever they are, they're continuing their research. Eventually they'll find out you're alive and they'll come looking for you, just like you went looking for them." The two Baudelaires looked at one another and shivered. They'd been talking about Quigley's family, of course, but they felt as if they were talking about their own. "I'm sure that if your parents are alive, they're looking for you too," Quigley said, as if he'd read their minds. "And Sunny, too. Do you know where she is?" "Someplace nearby," Violet said. "She's with Count Olaf, and Olaf wanted to find the headquarters, too." "Maybe Olaf has already been here," Quigley said, looking around at the wreckage. "Maybe he's the one who burned this place down." "I don't think so," Klaus said. "He wouldn't have had time to burn this whole place down. We were right on his trail. Plus, I don't think this place burned down all at once." "Why not?" Quigley said. "It's too big," Klaus replied. "If the whole headquarters were burning, the sky would be covered in smoke." "That's true," Violet said. "That much smoke would arouse too much suspicion." "Where there's smoke," Quigley said, "there's fire." Violet and Klaus turned to their friend to agree, but Quigley was not looking at the two Baudelaires. He was looking past them, toward the frozen pool and the two frozen tributaries where the enormous windows of the VFD kitchen had once stood, and where I once chopped broccoli while the woman I loved mixed up a spicy peanut sauce to go with it. And he was pointing up toward the sky where my associates and I used to watch the volunteer eagles who would spot smoke from very great distances. That afternoon, there were no eagles in the sky over the Mortmain Mountains, but as Violet and Klaus stood up and looked in the direction Quigley was pointing, there was something in the sky that caught their attention. Because when Quigley Quagmire said where there's smoke, there's fire, he was not referring to Klaus's theory about the destruction of VFD headquarters. He was talking about the sight of green smoke wafting up into the sky from the peak of Mount Fraught at the top of the slippery slope. That's the end of chapter 8. Lady Literature. What a landfill type of thing to do. Herpetologist. Isn't that a fun word? Despite all the inaccuracies, Daily Punctilio may still be a more reliable newspaper than some of the newspapers and news sites I've read. I know, something so rad like fire can bring sadness. 950 books! Definitely including Keegan's books. I own over 1,000 books. In your house? All in your house? Thank you for the claps. Wow! Please start a library with a borrow system. Or a trade system or something. That would be cool. We have one more chapter to go. I think we're going to finish in 2 hours or less of total uptime. Wow! That crazy. I didn't know if they were like in storage or something. Yeah, actually just move here too. That'd be cool. Oh my goodness gracious. I will visit your library. Your library! The library! Okay, I don't know why I keep saying it like that and making weird faces. Hey gamer, how's it going? It's going well. I'm almost done with stream. I have one more chapter to read, but I'll have my call number system and label them. That would be really cool. Library hype. I'm a freaking nerd. Yeah, but we love nerds. Okay. One more chapter. Let's get going. Okay. How many pages is this? Let's try to do some math. 205 minus 178. 25? No, almost 30. We can do it. It's all good. The next book that I will read on stream will be Nancy Drew the Haunted Carousel. That's pretty cool, Paige. Oh, okay, owned digitally. Yeah, that makes sense too. Okay, chapter 9. The two elder Baudelaires stood for a moment with Quigley, gazing up at the small plume, a word which here means mysterious cloud of green smoke. After the long, strange story he had told about them surviving the fire and what he'd learned about VFD, they could scarcely believe that they were confronting another mystery. "It's a verdant flammable device," Quigley said. "There's someone at the top of the waterfall sending a signal." "Yes," Violet said, "but who?" "Maybe it's a volunteer who escaped from the fire," Klaus said. "They're signaling to see if there are any other volunteers nearby." "Or it could be a trap," Quigley said. They could be luring volunteers up to the peak in order to ambush them. Remember, the codes of VFD are used by both sides of the schism." "It hardly seems like a code," Violet said. "We know that someone is communicating, but we don't have the faintest idea who they are or what they're saying." "This is what it must be like," Klaus said thoughtfully, "when Sunny talks to people who don't know her very well." At the mention of Sunny's name, the Baudelaires were reminded of how much they missed her. "Whether it's a volunteer or a trap," Violet said, "it might be our only chance to find our sister." "Or my sister and brother," Quigley said. "Let's signal back," Klaus said. "Do you still have those verdant flammable devices, Quigley?" "Of course," Quigley said, taking the box of green tubes out of his backpack. "But Bruce saw my matches and confiscated them because children shouldn't play with matches." "Confiscated them?" Klaus said. "Do you think he's an enemy of VFD?" "If everyone who said that children shouldn't play with matches is an enemy of VFD," Violet said with a smile, "then we wouldn't have a chance of survival." "But how are we going to light these without any matches?" Quigley asked. Violet reached into her pocket. It was a bit tricky to tie her hair up in a ribbon, as all 4 drafts in the Valley of 4 Drafts were blowing hard. But at last her hair was out of her eyes, and the gears and levers of her inventing mind began to move as she gazed up at the mysterious signal. But of course this signal was neither a volunteer nor a trap. It was a baby, with an unusually large teeth and a way of talking that some people found confusing. When Sunny Baudelaire had said locks, for example, the members of Count Olaf's troupe had assumed she was simply babbling, rather than explaining how she was going to cook the salmon that the hook-handed man had caught. Lox is a word which refers to smoked salmon, and it is a delicious way to enjoy freshly caught fish, particularly if one has the appropriate accoutrements. A phrase which here means bagels, cream cheese, sliced cucumber, black pepper, and capers, which can be eaten along with the lox for an enjoyable meal. Lox also has an additional benefit of producing quite a bit of smoke as it is prepared, and this is the reason Sunny chose this method of preparing salmon as opposed to gravlax, which is salmon marinated for several days in a mixture of spices, or sashimi, which is salmon cut into pleasing shapes and simply served raw. Remembering what Count Olaf had said about being able to see everything and everyone from the peak where he had brought her, the youngest Baudelaire realized that the phrase "where there's smoke, there's fire" might be able to help her. As Violet and Klaus heard Quigley's extraordinary tale at the bottom of the frozen waterfall, Sunny hurried to prepare locks and send a signal to her siblings, who she hoped were nearby. First, she nudged the verdant flammable device, which she, like everyone at the peak, believed it was a cigarette, into a small patch of weeds in order to increase the smoke. Then she dragged over the covered casserole dish she had been using as a makeshift bed and placed the salmon inside it. In no time at all, the fish caught by the hook-handed man were absorbing the heat and smoke from the simmering green tube, and a large plume of green smoke was floating up into the sky above Mount Fraught. Sunny gazed up at the signal she made and couldn't help smiling. The last time she had been separated from her siblings, she had simply waited in the bird cage for them to come and rescue her, but she had grown since then, and was able to take an active part in defeating Count Olaf and his troop, while still having time to prepare a seafood dish. "Something smells delicious," said one of the white-faced women walking by the casserole dish. "I must admit, I had some doubts that an infant should be in charge of the cooking, but your salmon recipe seems like it'll be very tasty indeed." "There's a word for the way she's preparing the fish," the hook-handed man said, "but I can't remember what it is." "Lox," Sunny said, but no one heard her over the sound of Count Olaf storming out of his tent, followed by Esme and the 2 sinister visitors. Olaf was clutching the Snicket file and glaring down at Sunny with his shiny, shiny eyes. "Put that smoke out at once," he ordered. "I thought you were a terrified orphan prisoner, but I'm beginning to think you're a spy." "What do you mean, Olaf?" asked the other white-faced woman. "She's using Esme's cigarette to cook us some fish." "Someone might see the smoke," Esme snarled as if she had not been smoking herself just moments ago. "Where there's smoke, there's fire." The man with a beard but no hair picked up a handful of snow and threw it onto the weeds, extinguishing the verdant flammable device. "Who are you signaling to, baby?" he asked in his strange, hoarse voice. "If you're a spy, we're going to toss you off the mountain." "Goo goo," Sunny said, which meant something along the lines of, "I'm going to pretend I'm a helpless baby instead of answering your question." "You see?" "You see?" the white-faced woman said, looking nervously at the man with a beard but no hair. "She's just a helpless baby." "Perhaps you're right," said the woman with hair but no beard. "Besides, there's no reason to toss a baby off a mountain unless you absolutely have to." "Babies can come in handy," Count Olaf agreed. "In fact, I've been thinking about recruiting more young people into my troop. They're less likely to complain about doing my bidding." "But we never complain," the hook-handed man said. "I try to be as accommodating as possible." "Enough chit-chat," said the man with a beard but no hair. "We have a lot of scheming to do, Olaf. I have some information that might help you with your recruiting idea, and according to the Snicket file, there's one more safe place for the volunteers to gather." "The last safe place," said the sinister woman. "We have to find it and burn it down." "And once we do," Count Olaf said, "the last evidence of our plans will be completely destroyed. We'll never have to worry about the authorities again." "Where is this last safe place?" asked Kevin. Olaf opened his mouth to answer, but the woman with hair but no beard stopped him with a quick gesture and a suspicious glance down at Sunny. "Not in front of the toothy orphan," she said in her deep voice. "If she learned what we were up to, she'd never sleep again, and you'll need your infant servant full of energy. Send her away, and we'll make our plans." "Of course," Count Olaf said, smiling nervously at the sinister visitors. "Orphan, go to my car and remove all of the potato chip crumbs from the interior by blowing as hard as you can." Futile, Sunny said, which meant something like, that is an absolutely impossible chore. But she walked unsteadily toward the car while Olaf's troop laughed and gathered around the flat rock to hear the new scheme. Passing the extinguished fire and the covered casserole dish where she would sleep that night, Sunny sighed sadly, thinking that her signal plan must have failed. But when she reached Olaf's car and gazed down at the frozen waterfall, she saw something that lightened her spirits, a phrase which here means an identical plume of green smoke coming from the very bottom of the slope. The youngest Baudelaire looked down at the smoke and smiled. Sibling, she said to herself. Sunny, of course, could not be certain that it was Violet and Klaus who were signaling to her, but she could hope it were so. And hope was enough to cheer her up as she opened the door of the car and began blowing at the crumbs Olaf and his troop had scattered all over the upholstery. But at the bottom of the frozen waterfall, the two elder Baudelaires did not feel nearly as hopeful as they stood with Quigley and watched the green smoke disappear from the highest peak. Someone put out the flammable device, Quigley said, holding the green tube to one side so he wouldn't smell the smoke. What do you think that means? I don't know, Violet said and sighed. This isn't working. Of course it's working, Klaus said. It's working perfectly. You noticed that after the afternoon sun was reflecting off the frozen waterfall, and it gave you the idea to use the scientific principles of the convergence and refraction of light, just like you did on Lake Lachrymose when we were battling leeches. So you used Colette's hand mirror to catch the sun's rays and reflect them onto the end of the verdant flammable device so we could light it and send a signal. Klaus is right, Quigley said. It couldn't have worked better. Thank you, Violet said, but that's not what I meant. I mean this code isn't working. We still don't know who's up on that peak or why they were signaling us, and now the signal stopped, but we still don't know what it means. Maybe we should extinguish our verdant flammable device too, Klaus said. Maybe, Violet agreed, or maybe we should go up to the top of the waterfall and see for ourselves who's there. Quigley frowned and took out his commonplace book. The only way up to the highest peak, he said, is the path that the snow scouts are taking. We'd have to go back through the vernacularly fastened door, back down the vertical flame diversion, back into the volunteer feline detective cave, rejoin the scouts, and hike for a long time. That's not the only way up to the peak, Violet said with a smile. Yes, it is, Quigley insisted. Look at the map. Look at the waterfall, Violet replied, and all three children looked up at the shiny slope. Do you mean, Klaus said, that you think you can invent something which can get us up a frozen waterfall? But Violet was already tying her hair out of her eyes again and looking around at the ruins of the VFD headquarters. I'll need that ukulele that you took from the caravan, she said to Klaus, and that half-melted candelabra over there by the dining room table. Klaus took the ukulele from his coat pocket and handed it to his sister and then walked over to the table to retrieve the strange melted object. Unless you need any further assistance, he said, I think I might go examine the wreckage of the library to see if any documents have survived. We may as well learn as much from this headquarters as we can. That's a good idea, Quigley said and reached into his backpack. He brought out a notebook much like his own, except it had a dark blue cover. I have a spare notebook, he said. You might be interested in starting a commonplace book of your own. That's so kind of you, Klaus said. I'll write down anything I find. Do you want to join me in the search? I think I'll stay here, Quigley said, looking at Violet. I've heard quite a bit about Violet Baudelaire's marvelous inventions, and I'd like to see her at work. Klaus nodded and walked off to the iron archway marking the entrance of the ruined library, while Violet blushed and leaned down to pick up one of the forks that had survived the fire. It is one of the great sadnesses of the Baudelaire case that Violet never got to meet a man named C.M. Kornbluth, an associate of mine who spent most of his life living and working in the Valley of Four Drafts as a mechanical instructor at the VFD headquarters. Mr. Kornbluth was a quiet and secretive man, so secretive that no one ever knew who he was, where he came from, or even what the C or the M stood for, and he spent most of his time holed up in his dormitory room, writing strange stories or gazing sadly out the windows of the kitchen. The one thing that put Mr. Kornbluth in a good mood would be a particularly promising mechanical student. If a young man showed an interest in deep-sea radar, Mr. Kornbluth would take off his glasses and smile. If a young woman brought him a staple gun she'd built, Mr. Kornbluth would clap his hands in excitement. And if a pair of twins asked him how to properly reroute some copper wiring, he would take a paper bag out of his pocket and offer some pistachio nuts to anyone who happened to be around. So when I think of Violet Baudelaire standing in the wreckage of the VFD headquarters, carefully taking the strings off the ukulele and bending some of the forks in half, I can imagine Mr. Kornbluth, even though he and his pistachios are long gone, turning from the window, smiling at the Baudelaire inventor and saying, Beatrice, come over here. Look at what this girl is making. What are you making? Quigley asked. Something that will get us up that waterfall, Violet replied. I only wish that Sunny were here. Her teeth would be perfect to slice these ukulele strings into halves. I might have something that could help, Quigley said, looking through his backpack. When I was in Dr. Orwell's office, I found these fake fingernails. They're a horrible shade of pink, but they are quite sharp. Violet took a fingernail from Quigley and looked at it carefully. I think Count Olaf was wearing these, she said, as part of his receptionist disguise. It's so strange that you've been following in our footsteps all this time, and yet we never even knew you were alive. I knew you were alive, Quigley said. Jacques Snicket told me all about you, Klaus and Sonny, and even your parents. He knew them quite well before you were born. I thought so, Violet said, cutting the ukulele strings. In the photograph we found, my parents are standing with Jacques Snicket and another man. He's probably Jacques' brother, Quigley said. Jacques told me that he was working closely with his two siblings on an important file. The Snicket file, Violet said. We were hoping to find it here. Quigley looked up at the frozen waterfall. Maybe whoever signaled us will know where it is, he said. We'll find out soon enough, Violet said. Please take off your shoes. My shoes? Quigley asked. The waterfall will be very slippery, Violet explained, so I'm using the ukulele strings to tie these bent forks to the toe area to make fork-assisted climbing shoes. We'll hold 2 more forks in our hands. Tines of the fork are almost as sharp as Sonny's teeth, so the fork-assisted climbing shoes will easily dig into the ice with each step and enable us to keep our balance. But what's the candelabra for? Quigley asked, unlacing his shoes. I'm going to use it as an ice tester, Violet said. A moving body of water, such as a waterfall, is rarely completely frozen. There are probably places on that slope where there is only a thin layer of ice, particularly with false spring on its way. If we stuck our forks through the ice and hit water, we'd lose our grip and fall, so I'll tap on the ice with the candelabra before each step to find the solid places we should climb. This sounds like a difficult journey, Quigley said. No more difficult than climbing up the vertical flame diversion, Violet said, tying a fork onto Quigley's shoe. I'm using the sumac knot, so it should hold tight. Now all we need is Klaus's shoes and... I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think this might be important, Klaus said, and Violet turned to see her brother had returned. He was holding the dark blue notebook in one hand and a small burnt piece of paper in the other. I found this scrap of paper in a pile of ashes, he said. It's from some kind of code book. What does it say? Violet asked. In the flagration resulting in the destruction of a sank... Klaus read, tears should avail themselves of verbal dialogue which is concealed accordingly. That doesn't make any sense, Quigley said. Do you think it's in code? Sort of, Klaus said. Parts of the sentence are burned away, so you have to figure the sentence out as if it's encoded. Flagration is probably the last part of the word conflagration, a fancy word for fire, and sank is probably the beginning of the word sanctuary, which means a safe place. So the sentence probably is something like, in the event of a conflagration resulting in the destruction of a sanctuary. Violet stood up and looked over his shoulders. Tears, she said, is probably volunteers, but I don't know what avail themselves means. It means to make use of, Klaus said, like you're availing yourself of the ukulele and those forks. Don't you see? This says that in case a safe place burns down, they will leave some sort of message. Verbal dialogue. But what could verbal dialogue be? Quigley asked. Friends? Frisky? Frilly? Violet guessed. Frightening? But it says that it's concealed accordingly, Klaus pointed out. That means that the dialogue is hidden in a logical way. If it were verbal waterfall dialogue, it would be hidden in the waterfall, so none of those words can be right, but where would someone leave a message where fire can't destroy it? Fire destroys everything, Violet said. Look at the headquarters. Nothing is left standing except the library entrance and the refrigerator. Klaus finished. Or we might say, the fridge. Verbal fridge dialogue, Quigley said. The volunteers left a message, said Klaus, who was already halfway to the refrigerator, and the only place they knew wouldn't be affected by the fire. And the one place their enemies wouldn't think of looking, Quigley said. After all, there's never anything terribly important in the refrigerator. What Quigley said, of course, is not entirely true. Like an envelope, a hollow figurine, and a coffin, a refrigerator can hold all sorts of things, and they may turn out to be very important depending on what kind of day you're having. A refrigerator may hold an ice pack, for example, which would be important if you'd been wounded. A refrigerator may hold a bottle of water, which would be important if you were dying of thirst. And a refrigerator may hold a basket of strawberries, which would be important if a maniac said to you, "If you don't give me a basket of strawberries right now, I'm going to poke you with this large stick." But when the two elder Baudelaires and Quigley Quagmire opened the refrigerator, they found nothing that would help someone who was wounded, dying of thirst, or being threatened by a strawberry-crazed, stick-carrying maniac. or anything that looked important at all. The fridge was mostly empty, with just a few of the usual things people keep in their refrigerators and rarely use, including a jar of mustard, a container of olives, 3 jars of different kinds of jam, a bottle of lemon juice, and 1 lonely pickle in a small glass jug. "There's nothing here," Violet said. "Look in the crisper," Quigley said, pointing to a drawer in the refrigerator traditionally used for storing fruits and vegetables. Klaus opened the drawer and pulled out a few strands of a green plant with tiny, skinny leaves. "It smells like dill," Klaus said, "and it's quite crisp, as if it were picked yesterday." "Very fresh dill," Quigley said. "Another mystery?" Violet said, and tears filled her eyes. "We have nothing but mysteries. We don't know where Sunny is. We don't know where Count Olaf is. We don't know who's signaling to us at the top of the waterfall or what they're trying to say. And now there's a mysterious message and a mysterious code and a mysterious refrigerator and a bunch of mysterious herbs in the crisper. I'm tired of mysteries. I just want someone to help us." "We can help each other," Klaus said. "We have your inventions and Quigley's maps and my research. And we're all very well read," Quigley said. "That should be enough to solve any mystery." Violet sighed and kicked at something that lay on the ashen ground. It was the small shell of a pistachio nut, blackened from the fire that destroyed the headquarters. "It's like we're members of VFD already," she said. "We're sending signals and breaking codes and finding secrets in the ruins of a fire." "Do you think our parents would be proud of us?" Klaus asked, for following in their footsteps. "I don't know," Violet said. "After all, they kept VFD a secret." "Maybe they were going to tell us later," Klaus said. "Or maybe they hoped we'd never find out," Violet said. "I keep wondering the same thing," Quigley said. "If I could travel back in time to the moment my mother showed me the secret passageway under the library, I would ask her why she was keeping these secrets." "That's one more mystery," Violet said sadly, and looked up at the slippery slope. It was getting later and later in the afternoon, and the frozen waterfall looked less and less shiny in the fading sunlight, as if time were running out to climb to the top and see who'd been signaling to them. "We should each investigate the mystery we're most likely to solve," she said. "I'll climb up the waterfall and solve the mystery of the verdant flammable device by learning who's up there and what they want. You stay down here, Klaus, and solve the mystery of the verbal fridge dialogue by learning the code and discovering what the message is." "And I'll help you both," Quigley said, taking out his purple notebook. "I'll leave my commonplace book with Klaus in case it's any help with the codes, and I'll climb up the waterfall with you, Violet, in case you need my help." "Are you sure?" Violet said. "You've already taken us this far, Quigley. You don't have to risk your life any further." "We'll understand," Klaus said, "if you want to leave and search for your siblings." "Don't be absurd," Quigley said. "We're all part of this mystery, whatever this mystery is. I'm going to help you out." The 2 Baudelaires looked at one another and smiled. It is so rare in this world to meet a trustworthy person who truly wants to help you, and finding such a person can make you feel warm and safe, even if you are in the middle of a windy valley high up in the mountains. For a moment, as their friend smiled back at them, it seemed as if all the mysteries had been solved already, even with Sunny still separated from them, and Count Olaf still at large, and the abandoned VFD headquarters still in ashes around them. Just knowing that they had found a person like Quigley Quagmire made Violet and Klaus feel as if every code made sense and every signal was clear. Violet stepped forward, her fork-assisted climbing shoes making small, determined noises on the ground, and took Quigley's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for volunteering." That's the end of chapter 9 and the end of what I'll read today. Let me catch up. I saw there was a lot going on here. Okay, when are you going to do that one? Haunted Carousel. Just after I finish this book, so probably a couple weeks from now I'll start it. World War Z. Hey, Holland. Hi, bestie. How you doing? Hey, E. How are you doing? Thank you for shouting out Terror. Thank you for shouting out Holland. Thank you for shouting out E. Who's getting sleep? Did I miss something? It says, hope you get some great sleep. Did somebody say they were going to bed and for some reason I just don't have it? Oh, getting settled for the night. I don't know why I couldn't see that in my eyeballs. Back to the grind. Hi E, hi E. Redesigning Sonic. Two months until Stranger Things Season 3, yep. Ukulele strings. I'm just reading all this Sonic talk. Hang on. Thank you for the host, Sarah. I hope your stream went well. And hello, everybody who came from that stream. Sweet Raid. Hey, A-Rocks. Raid hype? Thank you for the claps. Thank you for the best friend song. Oh, that's true, Paige. VODs, though. I did not finish your sound effect. I have not had a chance to do that, and Paige redeemed one, too, I need to make. Give me until Best Wednesday, and I should have it done by then. I'm sorry for the delay. Stream is pretty much over, yeah. Yeah, not quite ready. Just give me till Best Wednesday and I'll get you taken care of. Yeah, I got so much crap to do. It's fine. I was very productive today, though. Very productive. Got a lot done, you know. No rest, just go. But, alright. Thanks, guys, for hanging out. I hope you guys enjoyed. It was nice to get back into reading again. I forgot how relaxing read streams were, so I'm gonna knock these out. I'm actually sort of debating just going through the rest of this series and then going back to Nancy Drew, but it is nice also to kind of break up, go the back and forth. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll decide. Anyway, you're welcome for the stream, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good night, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll stream once I get home from work. I gotta run by the grocery store on my way home, but then once I put all the groceries away, I should be good to stream tomorrow. So I'll be doing some SpongeBob. We'll get back to some SpongeBob charity stuff. So I'll see you guys then. Take care of yourselves till I see ya. And then, as always, don't forget, much love from me to you. I'll catch y'all all soon. Bye!